Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Complexity Lounge, a meetup where we gather to talk about all things related to complexity and complex adaptive systems. I'm Jocker Selberg, and I co-host the lounge together with Barbara Frontera and Tiani Jones. Today, we invite you to participate in a new type of event, a discussion about the practical applications of complexity science in American organizations with two seasoned, experienced designers and longtime members of the lounge, Jen Briselli and Kyle Godbey. We'll explore the reality of working in the messy human landscapes of everyday practice through stories of success, failure, translation, compromise, and potential. Jen is a strategist, designer, researcher, and educator who helps teams realize the transformative potential of risky play and transdisciplinary collaboration. And Kyle is an ex-sound designer and recovering process engineer, currently working as a service designer facilitating methods based on complexity science, sense-making, and narrative research. So Jen and Kyle, welcome to the lounge.
Thank you. Should I say Jacko? No, just kidding. So big welcome to everybody. And Kyle and I want to start right off the bat with just kind of setting some expectations, giving you an idea of what we're hoping to do today. So first and foremost, this entire thing is an experiment. Maybe we'll call it a probe, a safe to fail probe, hopefully. And when Jocko mentioned earlier that this is about sharing stories of successes and failures, Kyle and I have plenty, but we're hoping that that's actually going to be fed by all of you as much as from us. So looking at what we have to share less as case studies, which we can talk later about why I hate that entire concept. Hopefully you all do too anyway. But more importantly, that we can share things that hopefully will seed or spark some other things that come out of today. So a couple other things. One, we know that a lot of you are folks who have been to many, many of the Complexity Lounge events, your old familiar faces. You guys will find, of course, that this is a little different. We're not going to be presenting anything, certainly not from an academic perspective. And then for those of you who are new to this meetup, welcome. This is atypical, but I hope that you'll come back for future events as well when there are super brilliant people sharing super smart and cool ideas in a little bit more of that traditional fashion. Second of this, we want to mention that we are assuming that if you're here, you have some level of familiarity with complexity science or complexity informed practice, whatever that means. So we're not really going to do much teaching today, although if what I just said as an assumption is not true, that's perfectly okay. It's fine to ask questions. You can ask them out loud. You can put them in the chat. We'll guide kind of a bit of a process around that, but you're welcome here, even if you have no clue what we're talking about. So realistically, there are going to be folks who are going to be disappointed that we don't have more academic, perfect answers to things. And then there are going to be people who are disappointed that they can't make sense of what we're talking about. So we hope to disappoint everybody equally. And then sort of last but not least, as we talk about stuff today, Kyle and I will share stories. Again, hoping you'll participate. If no one actually engages, this will just be me and Kyle talking to each other in front of 50 other people. We don't mind doing that, but we presume that you'll want to have something more engaging happen. So, like I said, we've got a few ways that we'll do that. I'm going to use a tool in a little while called Menti. If no one's ever used that before, no worries. I will show you how it works, but it's just a way to put a prompt on a screen and see what kind of responses people share and have those show up visually for others to see rather than just the, old put your ideas in the chat. That gets a little chaotic. But also want to acknowledge that folks who are listening right now from their car or train or are hitchhiking or whatever you're all doing, that's fine. So there's no rules if you want to just engage the good old human way and raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll just, go out loud that way a lot too. So before we get going into some of what we have in mind, Kyle, what did I leave out? What do you want to add?
I think you nailed everything. I just want to emphasize again, like this is a safe spot to ask the dumb questions. I often need those, or at least I need somebody to remind me that's available. And for everyone that is steeped in this conversation, this is a good opportunity to catch some of those. I don't want to call them dumb questions now. But find those new questions and share some of your favorite articles or videos or whatever. This is us trying to introduce and welcome new folks into this space. And there are a lot of new folks here. So please support that.
So we know that a lot of people were probably attracted to the description of this one having to do with applying complexity into the messy real world. And I know a lot of folks who encounter complexity, practices complexity science, often become very enthusiastic about bringing it to their work, their company, their clients, and then kind of run, headlong into a wall when they either can't convince people why they should care or they have a hard time explaining it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to spend most of today talking about that because it sometimes feels like there aren't really very many good support groups for that. So to start, we're going to share our respective origin stories, not to just be kind of navel-gazy and egotistical, but because maybe it will help spark a few things that will become relevant later. So for me, I've kind of been a lone learner when it comes to complexity. I majored in physics as an undergrad, physics and philosophy, and you can imagine what kind of folks I have sort of been drawn to in this world. And then, kind of even from that, part of my life, had some awareness of complexity adjacent kind of science, always found quantum and chaos theory and all of that very interesting as a young kid. Went on to become a physics teacher because I realized once I was finishing my degree, I did not want to climb higher inside a disciplinary silo and go to grad school, although I would have enjoyed it. I wanted to be able to do a lot of different things. And I had realized that I enjoyed peer tutoring and things of that sort and said, well, isn't that teaching? So went off to teach high school physics for almost a decade. Realized after a while it was kind of like the movie Groundhog Day and that maybe I wanted to do some different things because every fall it felt like I was applying the same things over and over again, being handed the same design challenge. Did not have that language for it at the time, but serendipitously was kind of introduced to the world of experience design. So for those of you who are coming from that side, that's where I made my entry into that world and went back to grad school, studied what it was essentially service design, systems thinking. There, I said it. We'll have to talk about that a little bit later today, and other related bits and pieces. But the program that I did in that part of my life did also draw on a lot of complexity theory, some of it just sort of without that language tied to it. So moved into the world of experience design, service design, design strategy, whatever labels you want to give it. The world of design is having an existential crisis, so we won't worry about the terminology. But all throughout, complexity factored into my practice, and I was largely learning it solo, reading books, kind of paying attention to what's in the world, like, listening to talks like probably any of us do. And I was happy to stay that kind of solo learner for a long time because I didn't really trust the more formal things that came from companies who were trying to sell me their framework, et cetera. But I just serendipitously decided to join there was a Cynefin retreat in DC in, what is it, fall of 23, I forget. And because there I met a whole bunch of other real live living, breathing humans who were actually very cool people. Suddenly I actually recognized, wait, there's a lot of value to being able to talk explicitly about this with others and figure out how to fold it into our work in a more community of practice style of interaction. So that's the sort of quicker version, and that wasn't even that quick. We'll come back to some themes there that I think we would love to hear from you all, but I share that now and invite Kyle to contrast that with his own origin story.
Contrast it with a long story. So I started my career in the entertainment world. I was first in the music production side of things, and then I went to the music business, and then went into film production, sound design. And uh, this was all around 9/11, and this is kind of the death knell of the old guard of the music industry and the entertainment industry. So I got to see the passing of that. Um, and then we didn't think we were going to enjoy music or movies ever again after 9/11. The apocalypse was here, essentially. So I ended up in e-commerce as a merchant for music, movies, and games at Circuit City, and pulled me out of New York and brought me down to Richmond, where I am now. And it was an experiment. It was a pilot group. Will people actually put their credit card numbers on the internet, not just the collector nerds that go to eBay, but will real people buy real things? Was the real question, and they didn't think so. So they gave it the keys to this whole endeavor to a bunch of 20-year-olds in Radiohead shirts. And we accidentally built $1 billion business. And then they brought the adults in and said, now you have to learn Six Sigma. And I had already sort of shifted my life, and I said, I'll play ball. But I'm used to working with creative folks and creating music and movies and working even on the business side of that. It was a very creative atmosphere. And I knew the one thing you couldn't do is treat creative people, inventive people, like they were part of an assembly line, which is exactly what Six Sigma required that we do, that we measure things, but also we move things in a very chronological and rigid way. But at least I learned the language. And so now I knew how to talk to them, but I could also break the rules and explain why. And that sort of became my career for the next 10 years or so until Agile came along and it started bumping out some of the Six Sigma practices. And I said, okay, I'll try this for a little bit. And as a product owner, I started taking on design thinking. And this looked really interesting on paper. There was a lot of attractive ideas here. The empathy mapping and the co-creation and all of that really pulled me in. And at the time, nobody was really driving with this. So I tried some experiments and it blew me away how it worked. First time I applied this was when Capital One acquired HSBC's credit card or retail credit card business. And getting people to work together to determine a new future that was not the trajectory that they were on, but was this new third space that was being generated. I was hooked and blown away. And I kind of came into this through Jody Forlisi and Danella Meadows. That was sort of my inroad into service design. And so I was disappointed when service design became a lot of boxes and straight lines very quickly. It reminded me too much of Six Sigma. So now fast forward to about 2020, and I'm working on risk infrastructure and I'm being asked, can you build a service blueprint to explain how 10,000 people in a risk organization manage risk? And also the other 50,000 people in the organization are responsible for risk. So figure out how that incorporates. And of course, the answer was that's not how service blueprints work, but challenge accepted. And I'm at Capital One at the time. We've got a really, an extremely productive design organization. We're plugged into the IDOs and the Nielsen Norman groups and PwC and all of the resources that could be available in North America were there, but we couldn't come up with these answers. So serendipitously, I hate to frame it that way, but serendipitously, the pandemic begins. We all move all of our meetups online. We all start using Zoom nonstop, and I have an opportunity to start talking to people outside of North America. And the first people I run into are the Australians. And the Australians are introducing service design along with a lot of systems thinking concepts all at the same time. This is where you're going to see Dave facepalm. So I'm watching this presentation and somebody's flipping through all these slides. This is a service blueprint. This is a journey map. This is a stock and flow diagram. This is the Cynefin framework. And I went, wait a second. Let me back up a second. Let me take a look at this. And I'm staring at it for a moment and I said, it looks like right now I'm in total chaos. The organization I'm in, the data is chaos. The people aren't talking, all chaos. Is this a way to gradually sort of sharpen the resolution to get to an obvious space and clarify everything? And the guy said, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I said, excellent. This is exactly what I needed. For those of you not familiar with Cynefin framework, that's a terrible misrepresentation of what it actually is. But that was my hook. My introduction to this was misinformation. So there's some value there, I guess. So I spent the next few months going down the rabbit holes of YouTube and whatever article I could find, and there were only so many. But I did the first thing that I think we do when we find something interesting and we learn it and we want to share it with people is we go regurgitate. And I learned how difficult that was because I didn't have my own stories. I didn't have my own metaphors. I'm just sort of parroting some of the videos or articles that I'm reading. And I'm doing this in a major bank in America, and people are just shaking their head and saying, think about your career, Kyle. So I kept pushing through, but I kept bumping into, if I talked to 10 people, maybe one of them would say, I'm interested. You're not there. You didn't pull me in, but I want to give you a little bit of a push, just enough of a nudge. And I finally was working with somebody, I was reporting into somebody who met somebody here at the lounge, Tiani, who hopefully is joining us soon. And ended up inviting me to these Tuesday night sessions where it's just a bunch of these nerds, Jocko and Barbara and Michael and a few other people here I see that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we are just getting on Tuesday nights and saying, all right, what's everybody thinking about right now? And for the first couple of sessions, I didn't have much to say because I was just drinking from the water hose. But after a while, I kind of got my feet underneath me and we're having these conversations. I'm asking all the dumb questions. Of course, I'm asking again and again, great, how do I implement this? And I'm not finding really satisfactory answers, but we're all talking about having the same struggle. And that gave me a lot of confidence, a lot of clarity in the conversations I was having. I was coming up with some more metaphors. I was able to start experimenting with this in new ways. And over the next couple of years, my presentations changed from a regurgitation to this is my story. Tiani is here. Wonderful. So these like communities, this group here, first of all, this is a big thank you to all of you, especially Jocko and Barbara and Tiani for hosting this. Because if I had just kind of like passed by this and saw all of the information and it was sort of detached, I probably would have been interested. I would have run with it, and then something else would have caught my attention, and I'd gone somewhere else. But I got to kind of live in this space for long enough to really explore it and realize that I don't necessarily have to have a PhD at the end of my name to be able to talk about it. That I can like poke at things, and this language was not something that was totally foreign to me. As somebody with ADHD, I feel like it's giving me a language, talk about how I see the world and how I operate in the world, and I haven't been able to really express that in ways before. And so this was enabling in a number of ways just to be conversational about it and be in it. So that was kind of the lead into this is why community is so important with all of this. Having the conversation was really important. Why we set this up today is not that we figured it out. We've got a framework. We've got success stories that we're willing to share, but more like we just need to have a more dialogue about this. And there were so many conversations I went into where I said, how do I do this? And the response was, well, you just, I don't know, tell them about Wittgenstein, or you just have to run with it. Like there was always that just modifier that sort of minimized, like, oh, well, shit, why haven't I figured this out yet? And I kind of realized that through sitting with so many of you and others around here that it wasn't a just. We're all figuring this out, especially here in America. And so let's put our heads together and open the conversation and talk about it more and figure out how to do that. And something I liked to do when I was coming to these lounge meetings was sort of stalk everybody. I would take a look and I'd see, all right, who's on LinkedIn and who is in North America. And if so, I'm going to add you and I'm going to reach out and I'm going to say, hey, can we do a coffee chat? And can we just share some war stories and swap notes and that kind of thing? And so many people were open and available to that. I don't think I had one person like blow me off in those conversations. That was also critical because even the people that have been sitting around doing this for 20 years, when I said, yeah, I'm stuck, what do I do? They kind of like shook their head and said, yeah, I feel it. And that was amazing. So I want to, for our first quick exercise, our first interactive exercise here, in the spirit of all of that, I'd love to ask everyone here that is comfortable sharing your LinkedIn profile with the rest of the group to post that in chat as sort of open, hey, I'd love to connect. And if we want to have a random coffee chat and jump on Zoom and swap stories, that is so critical in this space. Would love to see people in this room connect some. So please post that as an invite. And that's sort of my story.
Fabulous. And here it all goes. We'll have to like extract all of these later and hand them out to everybody. We'll charge you like, I think $1 for each. I want to call out a couple quick things while folks are doing that before I'm going to put the Menti slide up on screen and talk to you about that. One is I was hoping it would come through. The contrast in our stories is important. And where Kyle and I have spent most of our time, especially in recent years, trying to apply and bring complexity science into our practice is pretty different. I have spent the last mostly part of my career in consulting, agency, professional services. I'm an outsider who's bringing these ideas into client collaborator environments. Kyle's been doing it for the most part inside, internally, in-house if you're in the design world and that's what you like to say. And so we've always kind of had some good contrast to the ways that we've approached what we do. But in talking, we realize there's a really nice kind of 360 view you can get of what works and what seems not to work from that. So we would encourage you guys, if there are aspects you want to hear of from us, that's what we want to share and give back. The other thing is, I especially want to highlight when I introduce myself or when I talk to other people about this, a lot of times I see a discouraging look the minute people know I have a physics degree, because they might be interested in this topic and then they go, I don't speak physics. I don't need, and I have to find myself over and over again saying, you don't need to have a physics degree to understand this. What you need to do is either be willing to muddle around until some kind of coherence emerges for you, or you have to have some other entry point that works. And I find that almost everybody either has some entry through which this starts to make sense. Maybe it's physics, philosophy, maybe it's biology, maybe it's computational modeling and other forms of stuff you've gotten into there. Maybe it's anthropology, maybe, so there are a lot of ways, a lot of doors in. But I think for most people, just recognizing that it feels like there's not a 101 level. You enter at the 201 level and you have to muddle through. And Kyle and I work in design and whatever that word means, adjacent fields, a lot more than, say, software dev, safety and risk. I mean, we touch a lot of that, but I also want to call out that's what makes this different. And we're hoping this will provide good contrast for all of you. If I am talking to folks who are they know what Agile is, they're used to working in that way, if they're devs or whatever, they're a lot more likely to know what Cynefin is, have heard of complexity, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the folks that I work with, both my clients and my actual direct collaborators that I work with, a lot of them have never heard of any of this stuff. And so I end up in some ways having to find how to talk about all of it without any of the language you'd ever hear anybody in this complexity lounge ever use. And that becomes almost like a Trojan horse, because once inside, if folks are really interested and able to make sense of this, the meaning starts to emerge, like language immersion. So I see a ton of LinkedIn. I love that. I hope you guys all connect with each other. So the other thing I'd mention is I've seen some cameras pop on and off. I totally encourage you to turn your camera on. It's okay if you don't. I understand if you're stuffing your face and you don't want us to watch, but because we're not going to be presenting the way that folks often do in here, the instinct is to have camera off, but keep your camera on. Let us see your faces, and it'll make it easier if you want to raise your hand to contribute, to be able to engage. And also we can look at you and go, I don't like the look of that guy. I'm not going to answer him. I'm not going to call on him. So, all right. So here's what I'm going to do now. Yeah, that's you, Jocko. I'm going to put up a screen. And for those of you who've used this, you'll understand it. But if not, if you're not, I'll give you the instructions. So let's first get it sharing and make sure it works. We found earlier today that it had like a weird 5-second kind of lag, but should be okay if we're patient. Okay, so you should all be seeing a screen that says like www.menti.com, and it has numbers on it and a QR code if you'd like. Here's how this works. You can open up another browser tab and go to this URL there, or you can do it on your phone if you'd like. Some people prefer one versus the other. If you can't do either of these, or because you're traveling or you just don't feel like it, that's fine too. But any questions or anything before I move to the next piece? And I guess I'll look at Kyle and the others to like yell out loud if you think I should wait. But is everyone successfully finding their way to this URL?
Jen, we've had a request to put the Menti link in the chat.
Yes, we can do that. Let me pull up the chat and hit enter on. There it is. Keep me honest. Did I transcribe the numbers right? I did. Okay, doc. It's a physics degree coming in. All right. So here's what I'm going to do now. If you are in, and by the way, you can join in and drop out and go back and forth. Like Menti will let you, kind of join over and over again. So we'll just keep that link handy. If anybody needs it again, folks can copy and paste it and have it handy. What we'd love to do is have you all put a quick response to this in Menti. And you'll notice what starts happening is the responses are going to show up here on screen. So we're going to just see what comes out of this.
It
And
is
we've got a few
anonymous.
other things. Hmm?
It is anonymous, as you can see.
Yeah, it is anonymous. So take advantage of that. Um, Habit. I like that. I just sign up for the meetups.
Mhm.
This is not just for me and Kyle. In fact, frankly, we don't need the Menti. We can stop using it at any time, but we like this because it's a way for you all to see who else is in this room with you and how they have engaged in what they're interested in and what challenges they face. So the Menti is for you all to see this rather than for me and Kyle to use it as kind of audience voting or anything like that. So I'm just kind of looking what I'm seeing. Let me clear a little room here. Wow, you guys are also really quick to respond. I really appreciate that.
This is great.
So what are we seeing? Anything we want to like speak to so far? This one's really just kind of an open-ended look at your peers. Who else is in here? Oh, they're here for you, Kyle. Kyle fan club sighting,
How do I do this?
social relationship. We definitely expected there would be some folks who just want to hear me and Kyle blab on for an hour or so. Appreciate the two of you for whom that's true. Applied complexity. I will be honest with you all, I really struggle with the phrase, do we say it's complexity informed? Is it applied complexity? Is it complexity thinking? Is it complexity consciousness? Is it complexity transcendence? I don't know. I honestly just try to use whatever works for the audience I'm with. Deeply engaged with Knivin, of course.
Radiance. I like radiance. Complexity radiance.
Complexity ambience. Yeah, like trying to craft some of these prompts and just write the meetup like the front page there. The amount of wordsmithing we had to do to not be cringy, but also connect. Like normally you just say, well, what's your plain speak? How would you explain this to your aunt across the dinner table? And that's doesn't really work here so well. That's part of the thing that I am constantly running up against is selecting these words. That's well, I'm sure we're going to get into a ton of that, but finding that right word. How do we describe this in a way that makes sense, but also isn't misrepresenting? Is still a fine line.
Yeah, oh, and actually one quick thing while I'm thinking of it, I meant to say this earlier, because having the screen up makes it so that I can't see you guys. And also if the screen is the largest thing in your Zoom window, it sort of takes away from the back and forth we're trying to achieve. If you are not aware, the Zoom window at the very top of the window, you all should see what are effectively tabs. And right now there's a tab that says Gen Screen, and that's the one that's active. So you see the slide. Don't forget, you can always, when you're done staring at this, click the other one to go back to the meeting view, which shows you all the faces. But we'll put these slides up and down a little bit over time. One I just happened to notice here, and I thought I would point out, I think this is really a very common sentiment, and it's one of the reasons Kyle and I decided we thought maybe we would get on here and do this, is this sense that even after years of learning around complex adaptive systems and related work and theories and applications, I still feel like a beginner. So first of all, welcome to the club. I actually bet almost everybody in this room, maybe with the exception of one or two, who would say that. But that's kind of the point, is figuring out how anybody who feels like they want to get to some kind of next level, or more importantly, they want to be able to bring this into their work in a more day-to-day way. We're here to talk about what we think have worked for us and what you guys might find work for you. I work in a complex environment. Honestly, most of us do. In fact, if anybody here doesn't work in a complex environment, I'd love to hear what that is. I'm going to go to the next slide, unless Kyle, you want to comment on anything.
There was one, if you scroll up just a little bit, just below the one you just read, above that one. There we go. And occasionally feel like the only one who isn't doing it right while secretly hoping that's okay. This I feel, and this is where like the lone wolves out there, that's problematic. This is where I think why we just shared our LinkedIn profiles, and I'll be sure to put mine in there in a moment. But this is where we need to be connecting with each other, having those coffee chats. I take maybe 10% of my week every week just to catch up with folks and say, what are you thinking about and what are you working on? And what's on your mind? What has your curiosity? What has your frustration? And just swapping these sort of things has been amazing, whether it's in large group sessions or one-on-ones. Um, Not being the only one, like there is no playbook for this. Nobody has figured that out. And even Barbara's figured it out. If you go to Barbara's playbook and see how she enacted something at some point and try to recreate that in your own space, it will likely not work. It will require a lot of improvisation. And so uh, that lone wolf, that's like we need to have more of those conversations is where I'm going.
Really
Okay.
fast, just because I did see a question in the chat about if we can aggregate these responses. Yes, I can save, once we're done today, I can save essentially everything that is shared in these, and then we can send that out to the group. So it'll be in place of sharing slides later if you want to see what people do, right? Also, I happen to scroll up a little bit and see Dave mentioned complexity science, not thinking. Yes, that's a big one. I mean, I generally, if at all possible, I'm always going to lean into using the phrase complexity science because we are trying to apply a rigorous science to our work. But this is where even I've had to work hard to get a little bit more patient with people who want to say things that are far less exacting or accurate. And in some cases, that's a small sacrifice to make in turn for earning the trust and the faith to do the work together so that then later, when they're ready, I can be like, quit saying thinking, start saying science because it makes a difference, etc. So if you're like me and you've probably bumped into that, I thought I would just let you know you're not alone. Two here, I wanted to also mention I thought I'll hear some examples, cases, interventions, etc., stories. Yes. So we have some, and we will share them, but we're going to see which ones and what kind of things you guys want to hear before we jump into a lot of those. And then the other one here about being able to explain complicated stuff to 6-year-olds. You're in the wrong place because we're worried about complex, not complicated. Just kidding. So we'll come back to a little bit of that. But let me now go to the next slide.
Can I hook on to something real quick before we move
Sure.
too far ahead?
You want me to go back?
No, not necessarily, because the complexity thinking, not complexity science. There's this moment in the movie Contact where she's approaching Vega, and she says they should have sent a poet, not a scientist. And Jen and I talk about this a lot. How
I'm so insulted by that. I hate that entire. No, I'm just kidding.
Just trying to describe what she was looking at. She said she couldn't do it as a scientist. She didn't have the vocabulary for it. She wished they she couldn't herself, so they should have sent a poet. But this is where I appreciate a lot of the science, but also people like Nora Bates and a lot of the music that I'm inspired by, the movies that I'm inspired by. There is We all have we're all complexity thinkers all day long, if that's what we want to call it. This idea that it's sort of reserved for a particular space or a degree of acumen or familiarity. Like access to the language and the science is absolutely really fascinating. It's why I invest my time in it. But I love that someone like Nora Bateson can talk about, well, like sitting across the table from somebody and eating dinner is complexity. It doesn't get much more complex than that. Um, Trying to put the shoes on toddlers in the morning is complex. We are familiar with it. It is about as human as it gets. We don't express it very well in the words that we use, but we've got great music, we've got great art, we've got great stories, and we've got great metaphors that all explain the complexity and the uncertainty that we explore every single day, most minutes of every day. And so I don't want to say I don't want to blame anyone for any gatekeeping. That's the way I'll say that. But there is like a line that seems to be drawn. And that's one of the first things that I go after when I start to detect that line is to say that it doesn't actually exist. Not to put down the science or the rigor or the everything that goes into understanding this more deeply. But there is also just an innate human understanding that I think everyone here taps into. And so this shouldn't look unfamiliar from an intuitive sense in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally agree. I think for a lot of folks, figuring out what line they're comfortable walking is honestly half the battle. And knowing that you sometimes will be the only one in the room who have both the ability, maybe the power, the leverage to hold on to some level of rigor or to decide when you want to push back on whether it's language or whether it's some other, assumption in the work. Your role as a practitioner and your responsibility with that, I think, is figuring out for yourself, cultivating your own sense of where and what you're going to push on and when and how. So to me, that has been one of the most, and that's something that for my own practice started as early as when I was in the classroom and teaching, right? So everybody's going to kind of learn how they like to navigate that dynamic over time. But if that's not something you're thinking consciously about yourselves as individuals in your quote practice, which is what I'm going to use that word a lot because it's so different for everybody. That's a big part of this work is figuring out what you're both comfortable with and willing to take the responsibility for upholding with the consequences that come with it. Because if you are going to correct people's language or you're going to nudge people towards a different way of interacting in some form when it comes to, again, talking about rigor and talking about choices of words and vocabulary is one thing, but how you actually start to interact in internal settings, you're going to face some pushback from people. So figuring out how to navigate that is something really unique to each context or each organization, but it's a big part of the work. So I've got on screen, hold on, I'm moving windows around. We really were curious to see what about today's description drew folks in. So hearing stories from others looks like it's pretty high on people's list. Hearing stories from us, lovely. Finding other folks interested, fabulous. You've all got each other's info now in the chat. And then posing questions. I like the posing questions to us is like near the bottom. That's actually lovely to see. And then share. Nobody wants to share. Everyone wants to hear everyone else's stories. No one wants to share. So isn't that sort of always the way? Yeah. What I'd like to do is go to the next slide. And this one's going to ask you to actually start posing the very specific kind of things you want to hear about. Kyle, anything to say or add before I go to the next slide? This will be the last one we keep up for a little bit, and then we'll, pull this down and probably have more face-to-face conversation. But you good?
I'm good. I want to touch on the what you were just talking about and complete some of that arc a little bit, but we can move on to that next slide first.
Okay, so take a minute. What kind of thoughts or questions, a little bit more specifically, do you really want to hear about? And this isn't necessarily something we'll answer to if it's better answered by others in the group, but if it's something we can answer to and we'll give some examples, we will. So let's see what you got.
Yeah. So you guys are filling that in. So, what you were just talking about, Jen, really I guess how we go into this. So I want to run with a little bit of my origin story a little bit further because, I spent a lot of that time trying to educate and regurgitate. And what I found was most impactful was not actually trying to explain people how this works or validate it or validate my understanding of it. It was more, as a service designer, we love pain points, and I hate pain points. But I often got put in conversations, discovered the pain points within the process. It always felt like triage, trying to find pain points, and then I could never get the image of like battlefield amputations out of my head. Like that was how we were going to improve things, is through battlefield amputations with our pain point discovery. But what I'd find with senior leaders is I'd get to the questions that got them to say they really don't know how to move forward. It's not just that they're stuck or they can't see, but there's no right answer. There are so many things in conflict. There's so much tension that they're aware of that they can't figure out how to plan through this or what they were going to commit to. And my response wasn't to say, well, let me show you this framework or explain it to me, explain how things work. It was really just to validate that. That went so far in so many of those conversations to just say, yeah, you're not supposed to. Like, these tensions don't resolve just because you made a decision. The space doesn't get uncertain when we find the light switch in a dark room, we have to like feel out dark rooms. The light switch is only there if the infrastructure has been built by somebody before us. But when we're doing things that have never been done before, we're feeling out a dark room until we put our own light switch in. So I think a lot of this is, and this is again, well, I'm going to keep coming back to community. A lot of this is the sort of confidence that we have to bring into these conversations. That not only is complexity isn't a problem that we have to figure out. These complex systems aren't something that we need to untangle or map or discover. It's actually where so much of the creativity comes in. It's where people actually get to be individuals and collective at the same time. It's where these tensions actually shape really phenomenal things. And so you kind of have to have an appreciation for the complexity of these spaces and being able to have that conversation. And we're not going to invent anything new in a space that is a factory floor that is just maintaining operating limits, which is what they're asking for with the disillusion of uncertainty. Having that sort of like appreciation, that wanderlust. So I like these complex spaces because of what they produce, has been so much more productive in those conversations than trying to educate anyone on any of this.
So I am sort of scrolling through the questions. A lot of you guys are viewing the slide can see them. You can also see them in the browser tab that you're in where you're, adding questions and voting. And I hope a lot of you have maybe noticed you can upvote if there's a question in there that's similar to something you've already wanted to ask. You can upvote it. It'll move it to the top. We're not going to go through them in order necessarily. Just giving you guys kind of a view. I think what I would like to do, first and foremost, is that I would like to just turn the slides off for a second and like look at your faces. And I want to share a story that I think will answer to a couple of the requests, maybe at once, and then, you guys can go from there as far as adding in more. So I alluded earlier to the fact that I hate case studies because if you're any kind of student of complexity science, right off the bat, ye old phrase like best practices are past practices, things that worked for this organization in this context to solve this challenge were unique to that environment. There's a lot about that work that will be context dependent. And so even though there are certainly some principles that can be drawn out or that are generally going to be useful in this work, sharing case studies, which is really what a lot of folks are hungry for, can be really dangerous. Like I find that it just feels terrifying to do it because even if people promise not to, I know they're going to take what I've done or have seen me talk about and try to apply it in their work. And then when it fails, it's an indictment of the entire domain. And so it's scary to do that. But I also understand why. I understand the ask because seeing evidence that other people are doing it is both heartening for you as a practitioner, like there's hope, we can do it, and also just to help with seeing some of those examples sparks more ideas and gives you some creative substrate to play with yourself. So I will give an example, which is that I have applied complexity thinking in some of my work for a long time in lots of bits and pieces, but it's different every time. And so I'm learning as I go. In this case, it was with a client, large US healthcare organization who, and this is going to answer a couple of the questions. One of them was, like, how do you get over the expectations for things that are very conventional, the command and control, the need for a silver bullet, KPIs, et cetera. I am, as a person, relatively willing to do what I think is the kind of wrong thing to earn the right and the trust and the faith to then do the right thing. And the words wrong and right are not good here. But as an example of that, this particular client I had worked with in previous engagements, and the previous engagements were kind of unrelated, but they involved some workshopping, kind of facilitative stuff. They saw how I facilitate. My facilitation style is probably born mostly out of being in a classroom for 10 years, but it is absolutely what some folks refer to as complex facilitation. Not the kind you associate with designers who need to be at the front of the room explaining to people how to do a thing and guiding them in a strong-handed way through the process. For me, good facilitation is such that if it's effective, the people who are in the room that day will forget you were ever there. And I don't get to control what comes out of it, but I still can put some scaffolding and some structure around it. They had seen me doing this in some other work we were doing that was more conventional service design, some strategy work. And they came to me and asked, Jen, we are trying to have a series of deep dive workshops from across this organization because we've got these particular needs that have arisen in the last 6 months that have taken us by surprise. And there are different parts of the org that are all serving these needs and they don't really talk to each other. And we want to break down silos. So there was that phrase. And there was, we really need to be a little bit more systems thinking-ish oriented. They didn't mean it in any of the ways we're talking about here. They wanted to make sure they had all the right people in the room. And they wanted to do a series of deep dives, each of them focused on a particular topic, which was really a polished way of saying a thing they were doing very poorly at. And they wanted to have people spend 6 hours together. So they were already dictating the shape of the container. Now, as a practitioner, I'm over here like, you should have let me design everything from the beginning. Like, you should just call me with the problem and let me decide. No, but that's not how it works. So I said, how much of this can I flex? What's non-negotiable? And the non-negotiables were, we want you to run a series of these things that are 6 hours long. Each of them is going to involve different people, but each of them are going to be kind of centered around a topic. And I said, well, what are your goals? And they said, we want to just know that everybody has an awareness of the thing and how it ties to their day-to-day work and how their day-to-day work could actually improve, our performance on this thing. I'm speaking in generalities on purpose. But basically, I was like, so you don't want to get to the end of the 6 hours with a bunch of ideas and a roadmap. And they were like, no, of course not. And then I also asked, what's the appetite for being able to do some information sharing, some storytelling in these sessions? Will you tolerate that? Will the other people in the room tolerate that? Or will it be an uphill battle? And I basically got we don't want to spend any time with presentations. There should be no slides this day. If we need people to absorb anything, then they can just have a pre-read and they'll all read beforehand. And I said, okay, not going to happen. So what I did was design what was largely a process of sharing stories about each of their perspectives on what they see in their part of the org that contributes to the problem that was the topic of each deep dive. And at the same time, folding in sort of second and third order observations that each of them have from their different vantage points. We did this in a sort of combination of something not unlike what I call a fishbowl style discussion. If you guys have done like Dave and Kenevin's Triopticon, it's a little similar to that. We used to do this in education worlds and call it fishbowl. There's some things called jigsaw. Happy to share like specific methods, but the point is not the method, is simply that I wanted to get these humans in a room and talking to each other, but you kind of have to do a little work to make that safe. And so the first one or two, I knew they would not tolerate any slide sharing or information sharing. So we just didn't include any of that. And over the course of the session, some people were like, gosh, I didn't know that. I would really love to like hear more about that or see, because someone would refer to like a report or some research findings and they would like, well, I can share it with you, after the fact. And I let the first two of these workshops happen, knowing that they were going to kind of be subpar, I guess. And then they learned through the actual activities that they would like there to be some actual information sharing as part of these. I, at that point, avoid doing the old told you so. If we had done it my way from the beginning, we'd be that much far ahead, because they had to arrive at that place on their own terms. And so then for the remainder of these workshops, or this program, we would call it, that we ran, we were able to adjust the course a little bit so that we were starting with more of that information sharing. Again, I'm speaking in generalities, partly because I have to, but also because it doesn't matter. But I had, in some cases, people who volunteered to get up and share for 5 to 10 minutes. Here's some really important stuff that I don't think a lot of you in this room know, but if you did, it might change what you do day to day that would make all of us have an easier time solving this problem. And none of it was directly driving at the problem. Some of it was really a lot more about being able to obliquely kind of address and interrogate the boundaries of what the problem even was. And so I give this as an example, even though it's so generic, you'd never consider this a case study, because it was both successful and because it was something where I was bringing in what I consider to be the influence of complexity science into this practice, but I didn't have to explain Knevin or explain complexity science to anybody. What I did was allow for the complex system that was this organizational environment continue to be complex, and allow sort of small little nudges or probes to shift the way we were engaging in the actual program. And at the end of each of these, even though they also kind of wanted to identify some potential actions, in some cases we did a sort of mini version of affordance mapping a la estuarine mapping, but didn't use that language. But in other cases we didn't do that. But at the end of each of these, what happened was that a lot of folks sort of had a better understanding of what I would almost call the human sensor network that exists in their org and they just didn't have an awareness of. So I'm giving that as a fast example. I would invite Kyle to share another one, and then we can come back to the questions because I think there are more we can start to address. But I'm giving you guys that because so many times I think people are looking for examples that are like, okay, I sold this project or I work internally. I convinced my boss to let me do complexity. And then we set up a process where we figured out where we're at in Kinevin. And then we did estuarine mapping. And then we did da. And that doesn't really unfold, at least in our experience in the design adjacent world that we're in the way that you might want it to. So it's much more about kind of making subtle changes to what you're doing that others will just come along with. And at the end of these sessions, there were a few people who said, you know, when I saw that we were doing a workshop, I was like, oh, great. But then it wasn't actually really quite like other workshops. And you didn't facilitate it the way I'm used to people facilitating. And it's just different. And I didn't have to say, yeah, it's because I'm doing everything in a complexity informed way. It was just their ability to see that this was a little different, which meant some of them said, could you help me know how to do that more for my own work or for my team? Not always, can I pay you to come do this again for my team, but more like, could you share some resources? Could you show me where I could learn more? And then those people are joining meetups like this, and that understanding of complexity is finding its way through an organization. So that's my version of the answer to that question that I always get. I have other examples too if we want to talk about specific methods, but I'll pause there. Kyle?
You nailed something a couple times. That container that you mentioned, that's the multiple interaction points that need to be sort of addressed, was one of the biggest learnings that I've had through all of this. Going in, you're right. You convince somebody, fine, let's do complexity now, and then it's still all right. So what's the workshop, and what are we going to get out of it? What are your objectives from the workshop? What are we going to commit to when we walk out of the room? What's our exact agenda? What are our KPIs for this? How are we going to measure the success of this? Can we send them a survey when we're done and maybe get an NPS score to figure out if this actually worked? Like, we still live in that system that requires those things that will, in some cases, diminish some of this work, and sometimes just completely work against it entirely, a total contrast. I had a sort of aha on an early project where I said, we're not, we're the design strategy team and we're supporting a product and tech team, and they're trying to build an application for internal associates, but we're doing all of our research on those internal associates and what they need. And what we should be doing is a bit of research on tech capacity as well as our product team's ability to understand what's going on out there, what their capabilities are, how they're understanding the situation that we're in. Because right now they're still fixated on this. We're going to have a single experience that covers everything in a place that was very improvised. And we had to start creating problem statements. And I have an issue with problem statements in most cases, but we're at least able to surface and address, like, as long as we're held to these particular standards, we're not going to be able to turn the research that we have into some sort of product that's going to support these people, because there is not a clear indicator of success behind it. It's going to require something like that human sensor network. It's going to require a little bit of a sandbox for people to play in, and everything that our teams are incented on in terms of building and what our infrastructure supports completely deny that to us. So I think we have to identify that we're not just going in and saying, I'm trying to lift and shift this methodology from this place and I'm going to drop it here. That can't be the proposal, because you have to examine the entire space that you're working in and how that's going to intersect, and probably not address all of those things at once either. Today, I'm sort of convinced we need more parlor tricks. How can I sneak in small examples that have ahas associated with them? Very low risk tricks. Can we do an hour-long session with 6 people that doesn't pose that we're going to fix everything for everyone? We're not going to, unravel the entire thing, but can we get 6 people in a room for an hour and a Miro board to make a mess, and at the end of it, feel better about what we're going to do next, and then get into a bit of a cycle of that. And that snowballs very quickly.
So what I'd like to do, I'm going to give sort of everybody a little fair warning because I'd like to invite anybody. I see a lot of the chat in the chat. Some people are sharing their experiences as well. I'd like to invite in a moment anybody else to share. If you have a example, we can call it a case study, or we can argue that it's not a case study, but I'd like to do that, but to give everyone a little bit of like time to like work up their gumption or whatever. I have two metaphors that I think are relevant here. One I use all the time, and I think a lot of people like when it's in the relation to the concept of case studies in general, is the notion of being a chef or cooking. And I think that most of us understand that this work is like kind of the more advanced version of culinary practice. And you need a couple things for that to be effective. You need good ingredients. So you need the actual stuff, and what that is in this metaphor can be very different in each organization, but you need quality ingredients to work with, whether it's insights, people, skills, whatever. And you also need the right tools. You need a good set of knives or other types of culinary kitchen tools. And if they're not very good tools, you're not going to get very far. And then you also need the actual capability. That's not just like knowledge of food science, but it's also experience and confidence with your ability to take some chances and experiment a tad. And I think most of us in here aspire to be like a chef who can do all kinds of interesting and creative things. But yet we see that most of the time, if you share examples, people want to take it and run with it like it's a cookbook with a recipe, and it just doesn't work out. So, I encourage all of you to think about your own practice and ask, if I'm trying to be a chef, what am I missing that makes me feel like I can't actually be doing it very well? Do I need better tools? Well, no amount of like high quality all clad pots or whatever are going to make it so that you suddenly can cook something if you don't have basic food science knowledge, right? Or I know all about food science and I've read all those books, but you know what I've never done is actually held a knife in my hand and chopped an onion. So like, what part of your practice are you really leaning on because it's comfortable and you just want to build up? And what part are you actually kind of missing, and it's probably holding you back from just trying this stuff more in your day-to-day work? And go hunting for that. And there are resources all around, including places like this where you meet other people. The other metaphor I'm going to share, and it's in response to one of the other questions that's in the Menti, is about talking to people about this stuff. This is one I also tend to beat to death. But if you think about medicine and you're going to have a surgery and you have your preoperative meeting with your surgeon, and your surgeon talks to you about what he's planning to do you care about the ins and outs of what kind of scalpel he's going to use and what kind of incision he's going to make and exactly how the surgery is going to go minute by minute? Probably not. You are probably most concerned about, do I trust this guy? Did he go to a reputable med school? Does he seem to know what he's doing? Does he have some experience? Da, da, da. We are often in that position with our clients or with our internal collaborators and stakeholders. So I don't like walk around imagining myself a surgeon all the time. But often I find that the conversations that I'm having when I'm trying to earn the right or the trust to do something that looks different than your Six Sigma or your this or your that, I am trying to earn the trust to do that by whatever means necessary. Sometimes I have to just do something that I think is not quite the right approach, as I said earlier, and then I earn their trust, and I'll say, indulge me, I'd like to try something different this time. But other times you can earn that trust in the way you engage that relationship. Give them a reason to trust you, not by showing them exactly what scalpel you're going to use or why your version of the incision is better than some other, but rather the way a surgeon's going to tell a patient who is nervous as hell and knows a lot of things could go wrong and there's something on the line. Hey, I got this. If you just focus on being a patient and being a good patient, in whatever way that means, I will be the surgeon, my hand will be on the wheel, and we will all come out of this good on the other side. So think about that metaphor if you're worried about how to communicate this stuff, because most of your collaborators do not care about the jargon of complexity science. So you can find their language and work with them on that. Okay. Who wants to raise their hand and add? Go ahead, Rob.
I find myself like I've got like an adrenaline buzz, and I was talking to someone I met yesterday who is also, whatever phrase you want to use, neurodiverse. And before frameworks and theory and methods, there's just this like need to understand, see patterns, and translate. And then it's helpful when you learn these other things, but the fundamental need to interact with other humans and help them navigate through problem space is there. Anyway, that's abstract. Concrete thing. I had a tiny little, and so background. I worked at IBM Research. I ran into Dave. I've used Cynefin methods. I've developed some of my own. I co-founded something called the Design Studio for Social Intervention that stole and borrowed tools for social change leaders so they could have the place to innovate. So I have a toolbox and vocabulary, but I just do stuff. I was in a small consulting firm, 5 people. We got a large for me, $1.3 million contract to work with the state to help them with early Obamacare stuff. Our client was somebody who I ran into at a college reunion, and within 5 minutes, I realized the complexity of the models in his head were bananas. Like, I love abstraction, and he was at the freakish end of the spectrum. I asked him, all right, how does your organization, how does the state depend on what's in your head? How is this captured? And without doing it on purpose, ended up talking myself into a gig. We got through the procurement process, and there's this meeting where you sit down and you're already selected, but you're negotiating the details of the contract. So my team was on one side of the table, state workers were on the other side of the table. Aside, the client was somebody with influence and responsibility, but absolutely no authority over all the different entities within the state that needed to make the ACA Obamacare happen. So as we started talking, they realized that we had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea what was in our own best interests. If you think about like who has the knowledge, they were the people with all the knowledge. So they told us what to do and what we should be looking out for. And then we spent the rest of the afternoon, their procurement process was broken. So we spent the rest of the afternoon on the fly, like using our complexity tools and intuitive tools. We mapped out the procurement process, gave them tips on decision-making, communication across disciplines and stuff, and fixed the model enough for us to get through the procurement process and, started, building a coaching relationship and helping them manage things right there before we were even in contract. And no other vendor made it through their procurement process for another 6 to 8 months. And we were hired. The people I worked with were Gandhian nonviolent strategists, community organizer people who also had a human-centered design methodology. I introduced some complexity stuff when I started working with them. But we were a ragtag crew of a few people. We were the program management office for 6 pieces of this initiative for 6 to 8 months because procurement was broken. And I'm not going to talk about specific tools. I don't even know if I could break it down to specific tools, but we instituted some structures for people to report back and coordinate their working. And these people were on a deadline. And it was the kind of thing where something needs to happen and you have absolutely no belief that it can happen. So you regress to the level of a 3-year-old. So a lot of that behavior and a lot of stress. They were freaking out. The way we were externalizing maps of what was going on and sharing information, we were able to walk them through the specific concrete things they needed to do in deadlines. And on their own, they realized they popped up a level of understanding and realize that they're a state that has inordinate influence on how stuff works. The Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services decides how stuff is done on a national level in the US. They can't actually do anything or solve any problems. They can just grant waivers to people. So within a week and a half, we were in outside of Washington, D.C., meeting with federal level people who are making these decisions. And I'm going to stop my story here. But even there, well, actually, this is a good story. It feels like there's a lot of whining. This is a good story for you all. Okay, the policy people and IT technical people for all of Obamacare are in a room. They don't know who the hell we are. They think we're bozos. We made them do a story-based imagination exercise first thing. And it was like, put your health insurance card on the table, and we had like a form for them, and make your health card, which is like a different thing. Facilitating them, we didn't use any jargon, but facilitating them, keeping them from flying off, looking them in the eye when they're full of contempt and like disbelief and no confidence was part of the job. And I'm not exactly sure what all my points are in there, but like that's maybe a little illustration of why when I hear, how do we talk to them and methods and stuff, like, what are you doing? What are you actually doing? What are you trying to do with who? Like, start with that. All right. Thank you for entertaining my naive enthusiasm.
No, we want more of that. Anybody else want to share either a yes and or a you guys are stupid, let me tell you why, or another story? The hands can go up at any time. Let me add, because I am kind of just in the back end here also looking at some of the other questions that came through, and I can put those back up on screen shortly, but it's kind of nice to just see faces. One of the questions was about, and Kyle, I'm sort of pointing this at you. You and I think, can mention something here about, let me find it. I want to actually just read it, and I like scrolled right away from it. One of the challenges I've come up against in applying complexity science to service design, but I think you could insert anything here, applying complexity science to blank, is the strong desire of others to explicitly define the future state. How have you addressed this? I actually think this goes nicely in tandem with another question in here, which is how do you work with the concept of direction or disposition? You know, how do you articulate that, and how do you bring that in? The question states, you know, how do you create, communicate, or use direction or disposition when the context is all about specific results? And I'm happy to actually give a very short answer to this, which is let people like work through that energy if they need to, but there are actually some really basic activities or exercises that help a lot with that. One of them I find is to introduce the more like this, less like this activity. If you're not familiar with that, there are versions of it all over the place. Just Google more like this, less like that. I know the Cynefin Wiki has a description of it there. And then similarly, the future backwards, it's kind of a form of side casting instead of doing the typical, like define your future state, et cetera. Another one you can find on the Cynefin website. But if you're involved in other forms of work, if you're familiar with liberating structures or other types of activities, there are lots of parallel versions of these things that may look familiar to you. The overarching point I'm making is you can use a lot of activities that actually take that energy and just kind of like reroute it. So, Kyle, I don't know if you want to say anything, because I promised I was going to tee to you here. If not, you can tap Michael.
Yeah. And then I'm excited to hear what Michael has to say. I get pulled in and asked to do service blueprints for everything under the sun. And I like to say they're great for the coffee shop, where you've got concrete boundaries that keep people moving through small spaces, and they've got limited capabilities on their tools. You go to a Starbucks and they're maintaining their brand, but you go to a local barista and maybe a little bit of creativity is open. So there's space for that chronology and that structure. But I tend to work in spaces that are more the farm to table kitchen, where we need to be creative and we need to respond to what is available in the moment. And that doesn't fit into a service blueprint, but that doesn't stop people from asking. And so I think you were spot on, Jen. You need to let people get through that energy, because when they show up saying, I need this service blueprint, I had one asking me to do it for onboarding when we were doing an integration from an acquisition. We want to know what that experience looks like. Well, it depends on when and at what phase and for whom, but I'm not going to push back, because the moment I say, you don't want this, I'm not going to build it for you, they go, great, well, we'll find someone that will. And there are plenty of people that will. And what you end up with, if you've gone through this effort before, you do your research, you find the multitude of experiences, and you have to fit it into this framework. And so you end up misrepresenting people to try and aggregate some sort of average. And then you've just led people down some direction that is not a reality of where you currently are. And that we run into that sort of conundrum constantly with service design and these linear representations. So I instead of having that argument or trying to push that point, will do great, let's open up, let's just get on a whiteboard, and in 2 hours, let's start to map this out. We'll build this. I can run through a service blueprint real quick with you. But then we kind of add a little bit of a Socratic method to it. So just obviously this is how everyone is going to go through this, correct? Well, you start that, they start noticing the conditions. Excellent. Well, do we want to care for that condition? Other people are going to come through this other process with these exceptions. What's that going to create from a risk perspective? What's that going to create as an experience? Do we want to note that up here? How do you want to put it up here? And eventually they sort of, some of that stuff they isolate and they go, great, this is a thing that deserves the rigor of this linear representation. But the things that break down, that's where I think we get an opportunity to say, well, I've got some other options to make sense of this. And it might not be a true map in the sense of this is a lot of data that says this is exactly how you get from point A to point B and how far it is to do so. But it's enough of a representation that allows people to think about it and have conversations about it. And so that's what we very much did for this process. It does deserve to have that linear component sometimes. In fact, even the farm-to-table kitchen I was talking about, you still need to cook chicken to, 160 degrees? You can tell how often I don't cook chicken. Don't take my word for it, or you might die of salmonella. Whatever temperature, you still have to hit that every single time. There's still good hygiene in restaurants where things have to be clean. Things still need to be cooled to a certain temperature or maintained at a refrigeration point. Like all of this is a rigor and structure that exists that enables a more creative space, so that you can have a chef that says, great, all my ingredients are safe. And these are the constraints I'm working in now, but those constraints are wide enough that now I can create something interesting with what I've got available. Michael, you got your hands up. What's up?
Yeah, kind of listening to you, I kind of forgot the exact thread, but Jen kind of teed something up for me, because I was going to raise, and I'll circle back to a couple examples of using future backwards, which some in the community here may have experience in. One of the things I talk with clients a lot about is testing assumptions prior to decision making, or has the sense making and understanding of a certain decision space been comprehensively done deeply enough? And because one of the things that we talk about in complexity, applying a complexity, is becoming more deeply aware of the different reinforced sort of lenses or perspectives on a certain topic space that is emerging, right? So, I mean, a classic example, does your sales and marketing team really understand your customers, right? Deeply enough? Does, the senior executives that are making decisions for an environment, organizational space, do you really connect with and understand your frontline staff and workers? And you can go on and on. I think you mentioned it, Kyle, about maybe a merger acquisition. One of the examples I want to talk about in Future Backwards was basically two not-for-profit societies merging. I think this was done with a colleague years ago that I collaborated a lot with in California, right? And why don't I lead into that one, and I'll share a couple around that. So the assumption was they were the facilitator was hired to facilitate a tactical strategy session of, post-merger and acquisition. It was a merger of two not-for-profit societies, right? And it was basically a combined meeting of the board together with the merged operating staff. And so simple exercise is, separate, and this is an interesting thing is oftentimes in complex facilitation one of the heuristics we apply is you want to maximize groupthink in the smaller teams, right, before you entertain sense making, and give the smaller teams the same starting conditions around an exercise. This one happens to be future backwards, could be a multiplicity of exercises, and then have some codified output that then you can contrast and compare, right? Because you're going to, overall in the entire room, you're going to deepen that sense making before you actually facilitate decisions. And so this task was, let's say we have not-for-profit A, not-for-profit B that are coming to merge a new entity, not-for-profit C. We have operating staff from A, operating staff from B. So simple, 4 rooms or 4 different spaces separated so they're not interacting with each other. Same exercise instructions around a future backwards. So they produce a future backwards model, which, without getting into details, kind of gives understanding of the present state, understanding historical events, understanding about hopes, aspirations for the future, fears and concerns about the future. And interesting, the facilitator was negotiating their engagement with the stakeholder that was hiring him to facilitate this exercise. When he saw this on the agenda, because like Jen said, you oftentimes have to give a very detailed agenda, very clear understanding of the outcomes, even though you know you're holding a space for emergence. He wanted to strike off and he asked for 45 minutes. I think he originally asked for an hour, negotiated down to 45 minutes for this exercise. The key stakeholder that was hiring him said, this is a waste of time. We got to get into the details about what we're going to do as a merged entity. And the guy had enough trust to say, no, this is important. Let's just give it, it's only 45 minutes. Anyways, interesting result was the future backwards models were so contrasting and they had so many assumptions that they didn't realize about what their direction should be about a merged entity and stuff, that the entire remaining agenda, which the stakeholder was really passionate about, was thrown out because they had to resolve these differences, right? So that's an example of using this contrasting to and exposing that and yielding a significant result. But it's tough, I guess, in that little anecdote, it's tough to get buy-in on something that is going to create an emergent outcome that you cannot necessarily control. So one of the things I do as pitch is, hey, this is testing the assumptions, because before you take those assumptions on making decisions, we need to understand that you're making sense of the space as widely and as deeply as possible. And it's always partial with the people in the room. Another short little example was an executive team off a large ministry in a Canadian government context where I live. And basically looking at the staff, the 4 most powerful members of the executive team, the 5 most, junior in terms of tenure time. They weren't junior in terms of seniority, because being appointed to an executive team, they've got loads of experience, but their experience was adjacent to the environment they're in. And the other group of 4 members was more the regional, they're boots on the grounds, but they're very senior and powerful. The models, same starting conditions, you would expect this executive team to be totally on alignment and aligned on everything. They had some significant differences. And that self-awareness that they became, right, really, one of the best comments I got from that is the field staff, the field executives that were away from headquarters, the main office space, they're contrasting the model to the most powerful senior execs. They said, oh, this explains exactly what we know all the time, is you guys are in, analysis paralysis. You guys can't make decisions. The field guys were very practical and pragmatic. Just that awareness of those lenses carried into the decision space was huge, had a huge impact. So anyways, just share a couple of anecdotes of application.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Because I saw in the chat about uncertainty tolerance, and it ties a little bit into what both of you guys just said, Michael and Kyle, but also one or two of the other questions in the slide. I want to grab onto that for a second, because I definitely, well, actually, back up. Let me also say quickly, Obviously, we got something like 25 questions in the first go, and blah, 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 I'm sure there'd be more if I put the slide back up. Kyle and I partly did this to use it as a probe to see if there's interest. We'll do a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 10. And I think that maybe the goal here was to see, Barbara, don't laugh, but there's probably a regular cadence of this that we might need to launch. And he and I were kind of curious if there's an appetite for that. So for anybody who's like, my God, they didn't even get to my question, we will. Sounds like there's some energy. So definitely know and keep your eyes open if there's more to happen here. We want to continue the chat. But uncertainty tolerance is this thing that I definitely hear people come to a lot because they say, we need to increase everybody's uncertainty tolerance. I need to increase my clients' uncertainty tolerance. I need to increase my colleagues' uncertainty tolerance. If everyone just had more uncertainty tolerance, then we could all be perfectly complexity informed practitioners. And that's not really what any of you guys are saying, but it feels like sometimes the wall we're bumping against is that the people we're trying to collaborate with or whose buy-in we need to do what we want to do have very low uncertainty tolerance. And while on the surface, I think that's an important point, I'm just going to be the dick who says, I think that's bullshit. I think there is such a thing as uncertainty tolerance as a concept. I do not think it's an innate quality of humans. And I would challenge everyone here to consider it more as a context dependent or emergent trait of a human inside a specific system or environment or condition. If you guys are all really into complexity, put your money where your mouth is and think about what complexity tells us about the nature of human behavior, right? So I say that with love. It took me a while to arrive at this place as well. Probably 5 years ago, I would have been railing against the same things. And basically what I have found to be useful when you are finding yourself thinking that way is less about how can I help people increase their uncertainty tolerance, or how can I find activities or whatever that are like end runs around that challenge. Think about the environment that you're in that creates that level of anxiety about uncertain or ambiguous outcomes, and figure out what in that particular context or scenario there is some level of truth you can hold on to. Sometimes it's just trust and relationships. I mean, honestly, it's almost always that. But there are ways, like Michael was describing, like Kyle and other things we can talk about, that help increase the quote uncertainty tolerance, which to me increasingly starts to sound more and more like psychological safety and other similar ideas, which are emergent properties of systems, not the thing I'm going to engineer. I think we get the order backwards on those sometimes. I'm happy to have a very long side conversation about that sometime, but I think for here, we'll just keep it as a slight little tangent. But I also, tied to that, thought I would share with you all in the spirit of just try it, just do it. I do think that sometimes folks hear this, and I can hear the chorus in my mind who say, I'd like to do that, Jen, but I don't know what to do. I can encounter something, an opportunity, a project, and I know I should try something, but I don't know what. I don't know which method. I don't know which tool. I don't know how to do this. I've never done it before. And it's kind of high stakes because I can't make the first time I do it be an experiment, because if it goes wrong, I'll never get the right to do it again. On one hand, I would say, just try stuff anyway, because nothing's ever actually as high stakes as it really feels. But also call a friend, like dial a friend, like the old game shows. And I say that like meaning people here. This is the importance that, I found in having people who are kind of in the same headspace about this way of working and engaging with complex domains. Take advantage of the fact that there are a lot of us all kind of facing that same challenge. Find yourself a community of practice. It's one of the reasons Kyle and I and others have found we find different groups to join and pose questions to. And hey, I have this client and I'm trying to do this thing and I'm thinking about trying this. Has anyone done something like this? If that's what's missing from your life right now out of everything we're talking about, prioritize that, number one. But ultimately, being willing to just experiment is where the confidence comes from. Because, to tie this together, totally untested and just Jen making shit up, my theory about uncertainty tolerance is that your uncertainty tolerance as a human grows, aside from the context dependence of where you find yourself, in proportion to how confident you are in your ability to learn. Like, how confident are each of you in this notion that if you found yourself in a totally foreign situation, how quickly could you learn how to be or how to manage or how to navigate your way? And I think the more confident someone is in their own ability to learn, the better off they're going to feel trying things out, experimenting, etc. Well, how do you develop your confidence in your own ability to learn? You experiment and you try and you get reps at it and you do things that terrify you in a way that make you realize you tried a thing and it didn't destroy your environment, or it didn't ruin your relationship, or you didn't die or whatever. So I'm getting a little bit like out of left field here, but a recent project I did where I did estrogen mapping. I wrote about this because I know everybody always wants more recaps of estrogen mapping. So some of you may have seen it, and if not, we can put a link, but I wrote a little recap of it on Medium. That was a project that had nothing to do with anything that anyone would ever think of being a complexity informed work of any kind. But this team at MIT who does their online education programs had me in the past to do other things as part of their offsite strategy planning sessions. They never asked for anything that had anything to do with complex outcomes or any kind of strategic whatever, but I just recognized this is a team that would benefit from estrogen mapping. They're in the right place. They need to really look at the landscape of the current state, assess what the dispositional nature of the current state is. And I know that estrogen mapping is good for that. I've done it before, so I'm confident, but I also hadn't done it in quite the most rigorous way that this group would need. And it was virtual. So it was the first time putting it into a Miro board and creating the landscape for that. I could very easily have said, ugh, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm going to get paid to do this, and I don't know if it's going to go well. But I just did it. And I just did it with the help of being able to talk to some other people and get their experiences. But I also just made it up as I went while preserving the rigor of what has gone into the methods that create that. And then I'm able to share it with others, and I'm able to talk about it. And of course it went well because it's going to go well because all of us are careful, overthinking nerds. So there's very much like a far lower chance of something really going south versus some of the folks who are out there, using kind of watered down methods and just trying to sell kind of over polished nonsense. We'll put it that way. So I hope that's a teeny bit helpful just to think about with uncertainty tolerance. I have really changed my mind about that in the last few years. I used to work so hard to try to figure out how I could help my team increase their uncertainty tolerance. And when you start thinking about it more as an emergent property of a person in combination with the context they're in, it changes how you think about it. So, Steve?
Yeah, thanks. So I have probably a anti-case studies or anti-stories.
Love it. We love it.
Okay, and I'm gonna throw them out, hoping that they can get we can connect the dots back to the uncertainty and the whole thing about describing direction versus fixed outcomes. So almost most of my intersection between complexity science and work has been in my role as typically like a chief product officer, chief technology in early to growth stage VC-backed firms. And VCs are notoriously specific about you have to get these revenue results so we can make our return on investment. And that pretty clearly cascades down to the CEO and other people, and then so on. And I have yet to, and this is the anti part, I've yet to figure out how I'm able to, on the one hand, stand there and say, well, I know you want us to build this thing. We really want to focus on creating impact and value. We don't know what that's like. There's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know if it's going to be effective. We don't know that it's going to be adopted. It's going to produce revenue or whatever. We just don't know. I get to say that, and the people that I'm with are like, oh, yeah, that's the way the world is. But then I turn to the C-suite and the board, and they're like, yeah, shut the front door. That isn't the way it really is. You've got to promise me X, Y, and Z. And I've just never been able to cross that bridge, close that gap, to have the realistic conversation about what are all the uncertainties and unknowns, and can we embrace them and deal with them? Because usually the default is like, I'm scared, my ego's wrapped up into it, and I'm talking somewhat myself and the rest of the team. Oh my God, we've just got to do the death march and try and make something happen. So how any just sort of is it I loved where you're going about like, oh, help people get more comfortable with uncertainty or their tolerance. But then, reflecting on what you just said was like, no, that's not it. It's like, that sounds suspiciously like you need to change so I'm happier. And so not really sure how, or is it just the case that some environments just this stuff, you're just not going to be able to bring it in and suck it up, and that's the way it is. So I'll stop there. I don't know if that was helpful.
I think
direction.
That's a huge question. I think that's one of the things that folks who want to do more of this work face, that, that challenge. And I think you make a really good point, by the way. Uncertainty tolerance does skew sometimes like a little too close to how do you, get other people to engage this way, or let's raise their consciousness or change their mindset, or like, these kind of things about the world where if I could just get you to think a certain way, then we'd be good. But
I'm so tolerant and I love
humans.
you so much, you need to change.
Yeah, that's not how humans work, by the way. We know that people are more likely to, quote, change how they think about it and engage in the world after they've actually kind of already started being engaged differently by the system they're in and the people around them. So this is usually what I mean when I jokingly say sometimes you have to be a Trojan horse. It's not truly like I'm a Trojan horse going into a client and then promising one thing and then out come my complexity methods instead. It's more that I just walk in and operate a certain way. People learn I'm safe to be around. Then they start to see a little bit about what I'm doing and they go, oh, that's curious and interesting. And then suddenly they're kind of with me, working with me and learning more about what I'm doing that's different. And then before you know it, they're doing it too. And it got sticky and the behavior starts to map to, wait a minute, now I'm seeing something different about this environment for them. So counterintuitively, I think we all know that as humans, it's hard for us to engage with and be okay with discomfort and ambiguity and uncertainty. And it sure as hell would be nice if we could all just be better at that. But I think that creates a false, it's a mirage, it's easier to like want to go after that, but it's actually very effective to just not worry about increasing uncertainty tolerance and working in the environment that is very uncertain and just handling it. But I also wanted to mention, and then I guess, are there more hands? We can have some more hands. We've got some more. There was a question.
When you're done.
Oh, go ahead. Do you want to go now? I was going to mention there's a different question I wanted to call out.
Okay, this uncertainty tolerance. I heard this great story in a warm data session recently where someone was talking about the anxiety of the pandemic. And the way that they actually worked through it was just by sitting outside and watching the sunset and sunrise every day. And it goes back to something that I hear Nora Bateson say every once in a while, that if we're on shaky ground, we don't just step off it onto another possible shaky ground unless we've got some sort of our hand on something, right? We have to have some sort of stability somewhere. And I've been running with this idea that kind of finding these methodologies, these frameworks, these tools, it's kind of Dionysian in the beginning. We've got this gifts. Let's get drunk on it and go solve all the biggest problems we can possibly find that require the most risk taking and the most buy-in and all the resources to have anything effective that the most amount of people will have to recognize. And when I said parlor tricks earlier, I with a team, like, hey, we need to like order lunches for 25 people. How do we do this? I did like a 30-minute exercise that was kind of based on this sort of stuff, that just like everybody was freaking out. They spent more time talking about how are we going to order lunch for all these needs than they were just how are we going to run the session as a whole, this multi-day event. Well, cool. Let's run some stories and let's do some of these, let's play with this. And when we were done, there was this aha of like, that was a lot simpler than I expected it to be. Yeah. I wonder if we could use this to start to plan some of our sprints. Maybe like that risk when I kind of self-identify things, have the aha myself, starts to go away because I feel like I've got a grip on it. But if somebody's coming to me and trying to explain something that I don't really understand and then asking me to take a leap on it, that's tough. So working it in small ways, even fun ways that have nothing to do with like, we're going to produce something, but we have to do this like stupid team bonding thing. Let's make a game out of this. I did that with the Adjacent Possible at some point where we're inventing ridiculous inventions. And again, it was another one of those, do our product partners know about this? I don't know, but you should suggest it. We could turn this into a real workshop, maybe. Okay, you had another question you wanted to get to, Jen.
Yeah, actually, I'm also going to quickly go to one that's in the chat because Kobe asked, how long do you stay there, Jen? And I was thinking, well, just do you mean in the org? But in the, hey, I'm safe for you mode, but people you're working with aren't engaging. And this actually alludes to something Steve even said. Are there some environments, some problem or challenges or domains, some companies, some people for whom this just is never going to go? Yeah. Yes. Yes, there are. I do think more environments that feel like it's never going to go, like they're never like as much impossible as you think they are. In other words, I think most of us over time will come to see that things that past us would have said they'll never get it, they'll never go for it, actually turned out there was more possibility than we recognized. But there are still environments where I have done work, I have been working with clients who they have given me either the leash or the leeway to bring in these methods, but like nobody else is really interested. And when that's the case, it's rarely because the humans are like, I don't see any value in this. It's more because nothing else in their environment or the structures that have been established are going to allow them to engage with it in a way that doesn't also harm them. There's a sort of harm reduction angle to this that is always at play, and or a very, very, very fear-based, dysfunctional world where even if somebody wants to explore this stuff, to even say that out loud puts their ability to earn a living and pay their mortgage and feed their children at risk. And I would never expect somebody to do that. I've had people reach out privately and say, I'd like to learn more about this. And I still consider that a wonderful extension of the practice into some other field that person will take on. But yeah, and it's sort of like, how do you know you feel that out, And then for me, when I'm finished with a partnership like that, I don't look at it as a failure. I just say, they weren't ready. But I often say this to the folks who know me, so you guys have heard this before. Half, if not more, of what I think I'm helping with is actually just planting seeds. I will not be around to see them sprout. I don't know which ones will sprout and which ones are duds. I've gotten very comfortable with that. I think that's really difficult for a lot of people. We're especially in design and design adjacent worlds, we're so into this concept of making. Even if you're not making a thing, it's leaving a mark in the world. It's a human drive to leave a legacy. I don't know. We can leave the philosophy out of it, but I think there's something about that that's very tough for people. But I think others can become very comfortable with the fact that what I am doing or the mark I'm making may not be literally always this tangible shift in a system. It might be that I've planted a seed, I've done something slightly subversive. Sometimes the greatest act of creativity that I can provide is actually to do a little creative destruction, and then I leave and then a structure falls apart that needed to fall apart. So there's other ways for this to be successful than just the way that I think we're all trained to see. And so that's my answer to you, Kobe, is that like sometimes, yes, like eventually we say goodbye because the partnership's not going to work because the activities aren't really going to be effective or the overall strategy isn't going to move any needles for anybody on either side. But there's still something that happens in those environments that can be functional. And related to anxiety, because that's the segue, I couldn't help myself, but one of the questions that we got on that slide is, has it occurred to you that the inventor of the framework that we continuously reference with respect to complexity and helps our understanding is one who has made us neurotic about getting it wrong? And I feel bad because I suspect who this is about. He's not here anymore. He left. But hopefully he won't mind me I still want to answer this. And I want to answer this in a way that is not about him or defending or whatever, Dave. But, and if you ask this question, it's not Dave, let us know. But here's what I think about that. When I first encountered Dave Snowden on LinkedIn, I remember thinking it was like him making a snarky comment somewhere on someone's post. And I was like, why is this guy a dick? And then I let my curiosity lead me. And eventually I was like, he's not being a dick. I mean, maybe he is in some cases. That's his choice. I think he would acknowledge he's a dick in some cases. But I understood through some exploration what he's trying to achieve in those places where he is trying to protect the rigor of something. That's for him to worry about. I can't do that even if I wanted to. I don't have the right persona status, et cetera, and that's fine. But for me, there's no part of me that worries about making Dave Snowden mad. And the reason I don't worry about it, This is very real talk, right? We're getting to like almost to the end of the second hour. So now let's be real, okay? I wish Dave was here for this, but he'll probably hear it later. There's no part of me that is worried that I'm going to invite Dave's ire in the work I do, not because I think that it might not happen. I'm sure there are things that I've done and said, or in the future I might, where I might earn a Dave Snowden, verbal lashing. But I think more because I am confident in my own understanding of complexity science, and I am confident in my own understanding of the methods and frameworks that he and Knev and Company have developed, such that anytime I am implementing something that involves either of those, I do not worry about any kind of outcome tied to that, because I'm operating in good faith with good intention and with a level of understanding and rigor that I know makes it okay. And I'm sharing this not to be like an arrogant jerk, but because I want you to take note of the two things I said. I'm confident in my understanding of complexity science, and I'm confident in my understanding of the methods and the frameworks. And that's because I put some damn hard work into both of those. And so if you're a person, and again, I say this with love, you're nervous or you see this anxiety that Dave kind of triggers in people, to me, I almost look at it like that's a super magnet that's kind of pulling out the iron filings where people have gaps in knowledge or in confidence or in rigor. If you do the work, you can also achieve a level of confidence. And it doesn't have to be because you've done 18 base camps or you've paid this much money for some certification from somewhere. A lot of that comes from social learning that is situated in practice and not that you've mastered an academic text. So I have gotten a lot of, quote, reps. You're weightlifting, you want to get a lot of reps, so you build the muscle memory. I've gotten a lot of reps doing this in my day job because I'm willing to do it and I'm willing to try it and I'm willing to get clients to come along with me. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to me say this and they're getting either itchy or they're like, my God, what a jerk of an answer. Where do you feel like the weakest as far as your confidence and your understanding of complexity science, or where do you feel the weakest in terms of applying methods or things you'd like to be applying more? That's going to shine a spotlight on exactly what to do literally as soon as this call is done. Find other humans you can learn from that will fill in those knowledge and confidence gaps. And then all of your concerns about Dave Snowden and the anxiety he seems to induce will just dissolve into the air. Gosh, Dave, if you're watching this on the recording, I'd love to hear your response to this.
Dave, we really like you, Dave. Don't be mad.
No, I mean, let me, if it's okay, let me also say this. I don't remember when I first encountered Knev. As I mentioned, I learned about sort of early versions of complexity science for me and my own understanding of it as far back as my physics degree. And then very quickly, even as a physics teacher, and then later as a design practitioner, was pulling in system science, complexity science, learning about these things and pulling them into my practice. And I don't remember when I first encountered Dave's work, but I like felt like I understood his language. And that's because I think physics and philosophy puts us on a par, with like, he's using words I know. And I know that's not true for everybody, but like Dave is the reason that I learned about some of the things I've learned about that I've now been able to put into practice, even if I first saw his interaction on LinkedIn and was like, what the hell? And I just share that because that contrast is important. And Dave's not the only important person in the world of complexity science, but there's always going to be these pluralities to what different humans and frameworks and ways of thinking represent. So for you guys, for everyone as individuals, I mean, that's what I encourage you to explore. Who are the humans that are providing resources and materials in a language you already speak? If my native tongue is physics, it helps me to learn complexity science and physics language. If your native tongue is sociology, find people who are talking about complexity science in the language of sociology, and then over time start to translate that on a Rosetta Stone and speak it in other languages. So I can talk about complexity in terms of physics. I can read and understand the constructor theory. I get that stuff. Doesn't matter to me if other people do, and it doesn't make me special. I can also speak complexity in the language of Fortune 50 healthcare company client nonsense, but I couldn't when I started. So learn it in your native tongue. Find the person who speaks it in your native tongue. We can help each other find those people if you need help. And only after that do you really, need to expand beyond that. So anyway.
Yeah, I speak it in music. And real quick, I just want to the metaphor I like to use is that it's like French language. There's the Académie Française that manages the rules of the French language. That's great. That's an enabler so that we can also have Quebecois and Korean, Haitian Creole and the Cajun derivatives. And so I consider myself speaking one of those languages, and that's I've gotten okay with that. That's sort of what we kind of prompted this whole thing with. This is the mess of bringing it into a localized context and making it work. And so I'm glad that there are people that are maintaining that rigor, and from that, I feel like I get to translate it into a local context. And that's my place. It is not as a student of the core language 100% of the time.
High Latin and vernacular. We need both.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a function of what happens as these ideas spread, right? The meanings begin to attenuate. And, my joke is always, as soon as something makes it onto the front page of the Harvard Business Review, or the front cover, sorry, I love the Harvard Business Review. Don't at me. Now we're in trouble, right? Because they're going to read the Harvard Business Review, and now it's like, I know what this is. Or they're going to start picking up some of the jargon. And, I use that word advisedly. And suddenly what we are talking about when we talk about some of these concepts and practices is not what is actually being absorbed by by the larger audience for some of these publications and for some of these videos that you see and things like that. And so that rigor, and it is well-deserved rigor, is important, because it's too easy to lose track as these things, we're in the kind of Wild West here. And I think that it's really important to have these touchstones. And I appreciate when someone wants to be that touchstone.
Yeah. I think too, there's because we're on this topic now of like things that they turn to memes, they become watered down, they turn into management toolkits, flattened or over instrumentalized. And we can rail against this. I mean, God knows I do, but also it is kind of in some ways the evolutionary force of an idea. So, I chuckle a little bit too. I'll give you guys a little almost embarrassing story. The first time I started to encounter folks from the complexity science world who were railing or complaining about or contrasting with systems thinking, I didn't understand that, because my introduction to systems thinking was, to be accurate, would say was really complexity. I didn't really understand, like, wait, what do you mean complexity versus systems thinking? Like, aren't they kind of the same thing? What are you talking about? And I also don't know to this day that you could find, if we polled everybody who's still here in this room, what is it? What do we got? We got 42 people. We would get 42 definitions of systems thinking. We'd get 42 definitions of complexity. There are definitely some agreed upon rigorous, examples of certain things, but I sometimes hear, especially lately, this need to draw a contrast. It's like you create a straw man version of the thing so that you can contrast your horse from that horse in the race. And so I just can't help but hear, like, hashtag not all blank, like hashtag not all systems thinking. So like when some people are like, hey, that HBR article about systems thinking that just came out, that's not my systems thinking, and then there's like, well, my systems thinking is actually a lot more like what you're calling complexity science. And And I just encourage anybody, like, just get out of that fray. Like, just stay out of that. It's the same thing that happened with design thinking.
No.
It's not the same as design and the history of design, as craft, as rhetoric, as technique. It's not the same thing. Like, there's a similar trope, I think, that behavior change has gone through as well, applied behavioral science, and now it's behavior change design, and we just apply the COM-B method, and then we're done, So guys, just try, especially those of you who are a little on the newer end of this stuff, just don't get sucked into that world. Just try to stay out of those arguments and try to follow what you can read as the signal of rigor, and not something that's been packaged up for a C-suite management toolkit. I know we're at 2. I know a lot of people obviously plan for this to be a 2-hour thing. I know that some of us can stay a little longer. But Kyle, is there anything you want to say? Is there any question nobody asked that you wish they'd asked? We have questions in our list that we didn't get to, and to me, that just means we need to do another one of these. So, stay tuned for more on that. But anything you wanted to address today that nobody asked you and you wish they had, and then Barbara, I guess when we're done with that, you can pull us off the stage with the big hook.
We didn't get into a whole lot of the participatory design. We'll have to come back to that. But Steve, what you were talking about earlier about the translating from your VCs to your board, I haven't been in that relationship, but when I find that there are impacted people, I want them to be at the same table as we're talking. And I don't have to be the messenger. I don't have to try and represent what this impacted person is feeling or going through or experiencing or expecting so that this impacted person can digest that. But putting everybody at the same table, when that's possible, is always where I go. That allows for the aha. That allows for the language to sort itself out across multiple domains and levels of interaction within the organization. That has never failed me. And so I think that's our boot to next time. Let's focus a little bit more on what participatory design does for this. But that's where I become less of the Steve Jobs version of what a designer is, the design savior of I'm going to produce and save and you're going to give me resources and assimilate. And more of just a facilitator where I get to be the space maker that says, this is where we're going to discover. And I don't know those answers. And no, there is no one answer, but if I can put the table together, or we can put the table together, that's where we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, well said.
Oh. Okay. Jocko, any final thoughts before I bring us home?
No, it's been awesome. Exploring a lot of the corners of all this. It seems to me that we probably have a lot more to talk about. So very excited to have this kickoff and see where it takes us all.
Okay. Well, on that note, let's face it, there's going to be another one of these. I mean, at this point, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kyle, so much for this. I mean, this has been very different from what we often do, but well worth it. I think we touched on corners of what we're all trying to accomplish here that we normally don't really access. So thanks again for all of that. Thanks to all of you for hanging in there with us and participating. You are an integral part of this process. So thank you. Thank you for showing up.
Yeah,
We
thank you,
have lots of interesting guests coming up in the fall, so I encourage all of you to watch your meetup page. And once again, thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.